welcome to Bird watching is a rewarding and at the same time a frustrating experience. But what is it like in a country like Ethiopia that hosts over 800 species of birds? For Steve Rooke, an avid bird watcher and guide of birders groups, it simply is overwhelming. A very warm welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
You know Ethiopia for quite of a century as a bird watcher, right?
Yeah, nearly 24 years I've been coming here.
A young bird watcher, you were doing something else too.
Yes, I was working for a conservation organisation in the UK, which I eventually left to start leading bird watching tours.
So you started bird watching tours or guiding basically 24 years ago.
Yeah.
So what was your first experience like? Did you know then what you know now about Ethiopia as far as birds go?
I knew a fair amount. I'd done a lot of research before coming here, and I'd led a lot of tours in Kenya before coming here. I think I was expecting Ethiopia to be a little bit like Kenya or other places in Africa, and I soon discovered it isn't. It's very, very different.
In what sense?
Oh, the landscape, the people, the culture, the birds were particularly different and interesting.
How many bird species do we have in this country? Over 800?
865, I think it is, species in Ethiopia.
And there are 24 or 25 endemic species, right?
Just to Ethiopia, there's about 18 endemic species.
If you're an Ethiopian and you want to go bird watching, where will you go first?
Well, you're very lucky here, because even Addis is really quite a green city, and there are a lot of birds right within the city. Any sort of green space.
These are the usual suspects, of course.
They are, but some of the endemics, you can see several of the endemic birds right in the centre of the city. So you can start.
Like, guide me through that.
Things like there's a small flycatcher. If you go to somewhere like the Gien Hotel and go looking in the grounds there, you'll see the Abyssinian slaty flycatcher, wattled ibis right in the centre, the white nape pigeon, very common in the city. So all birds which you can only see in Ethiopia.
We have those birds in the city because we have a few trees left, right?
Yeah.
So have we lost some of the bird species in the last few decades that you have been in and out of Ethiopia?
Yeah. No, I think by and large we still see the same sort of numbers of birds in the city that we used to see. Yeah, I mean, obviously
we've cut down so many trees, huh?
You have, yes, but there's still quite a good number left, and I think it's important that those green spaces are protected and looked after. But no, there still seem to be plenty of birds in the city. Perhaps fewer birds of prey, like the vultures and the black kites. You don't see as many of those filling the skies as you used to, which is a little worrying, really. But
and why is that?
Because in other parts of Africa, birds of prey have started to decline very, very badly for a number of reasons, particularly the use of pesticides. Because birds of prey, at the top of the food chain, they're the ones where any problems in the system show itself, first of all.
So you can tell how low we've gone in terms of conservation.
Birds generally are a very good indicator of how the environment is doing. Not the only one, but they are a very good indicator.
And the Great Ethiopian Rift, that's the birdwatcher's dream.
It is. And
the Rift Lakes and so on.
Yes, yeah. The Rift Valley and the lakes are fantastic for birds. And, of course, the highland areas that formed either side of the Rift Valley are also very special as well.
Tell me about the birds in the lakes region.
Well, the lakes, it's a very broad habitat, so not as specialised as, say, the Bali Mountains. So you get, obviously, big numbers of water birds on the lakes. Things like, the greater and lesser flamingos occur in there hundreds of thousands.
But I'm talking about the pink flamingos in Lake Abiata, right?
Yes, yeah. But some of the reserves are suffering. So some of those national parks are suffering. They
Lake Abiata because of the soda ash factory.
It's the soda ash factory which has affected the water levels in the lake. When I first came here, you could get almost very easily to the edge of the lake. Now it's a very, very long walk. But also the amount of overgrazing and intrusion with people living inside the national park.
For all practical purposes, Abiata Shala has ceased to be a national park.
No, it's a famous naturalist described it recently as an ecological disaster area.
It was very easy to save it.
Yeah.
What was it like then?
It was a beautiful place.
How beautiful?
Really lush, very green, especially around the lake edge, and absolutely teeming with birds. Huge numbers. You could spend a whole day there quite easily. And there's still birds there, but they're more difficult to see, and the numbers are decreasing really.
So as you drive further south, you run into some species which are endemic, right?
Yes, yeah, and I mean, when the typical bird watching tour would go right down to Yabello in the south, where there are some very interesting birds.
What do you find in Yabello?
Well, I suppose that the main reason people go there is
The bush crow?
The bush crow, Stresman's bush crow, a bird which is...
Very interesting story in there, of course.
It's a totally unique species. There's nothing else like it really in the world. And what's very interesting is that it's confined to this really small area around Yabello. But it's not uncommon. It's actually, there's quite a lot of them there. And as you drive towards Yabello, you suddenly almost cross an invisible line. And suddenly there are no bush crows, and then there are bush crows. And for years, nobody knew why that was. They thought it might have been food, but that's been disproved. They found out that the bush crow habitat, its range, is a temperature bubble. That the mean temperature of the area that the bush crow lives in,
well, it's cooler.
Is cooler, just by a few degrees, to the outside area, as a result of geographical features mainly. And so they've discovered then, having found that, they started studying the birds nesting, and they discovered it's the young birds need cool conditions when they first hatch.
The higher the nesting place, the better.
It's very easy to find a bush crow nest because they nest right on top of a tall acacia tree, because it's cooler. And interestingly, when the Chinese put in some power pylons down there recently, a bush crow nested right up in a pylon for the first time because it's cool. It was presented with a good high nesting place, and he took it.
There's also the Turako on the other side. That's in Negeli.
Prince Rispoli's Turako, yeah.
There's an interesting story in there as well.
A really interesting story that it was back in the 1800s. There was a minor Italian nobleman, Prince Rispoli, was out here basically hunting, shooting birds. And in those days, the museums in Europe were really thirsty for specimens. So he didn't know what things were. He just shot them.
The taxidermy and all that.
Yeah, exactly. He would take the skin and send it off to Europe. And a box of these skins was being unpacked in a European museum, and they came across this beautiful Turako, which they realised was new to science. Nobody knew what it was. But Prince Rispoli just wrote on the label, he just wrote Southern Ethiopia. He didn't say where. And unfortunately, before he could tell anyone, or anyone could ask him, he was trampled to death by an elephant. So from the late 1800s until 1940s, 1947, nobody knew where to find Prince Rispoli's Turako.
I'm sure the locals knew.
The local people knew, yes, yeah, it was, yeah.
There is a unique story behind every bird species, correct?
Yes, to some extent, and the great thing about Ethiopia is really there's probably a lot more to find out. There's probably even new species to science potentially out there that are yet to be discovered. The ornithology of Ethiopia, although it's been well studied, there are still many, many things to discover.
There are also endangered species.
Yes, yeah.
As a Turako is.
Yeah, well, actually the Turako seems to survive in quite degraded habitat.
Really?
Yeah, so then that's not really of immediate concern. There are other species. Just south of Negeli, there's a bird called the Sidano lark, or Liban lark, and it lives on a large plain, the Liban plain. And that's it. That's pretty much the only place it's found. And that requires very specific habitat. And there are big risks with overgrazing and, in particular, with the habitat being cultivated, which destroys any sort of breeding site for it. There's probably, about 200 individuals left in the world?
Ethiopia
that's it, in Ethiopia pretty much, yeah. There are a few in the north of Ethiopia, but not very many, and it may possibly exist in small numbers in Somalia, but we're not sure. The main stronghold is the Liban.
And there is nothing seasonal about them, right?
No, they're resident, they don't go anywhere else, they stay there, and they rely on this very specific grassland habitat.
You started as a bird watcher, right? You told me off camera that you were an 8-year-old kid when you first remember to have a look intensely.
I've been looking at birds. I've been looking at birds ever since I can remember, really. It's just been a lifelong fascination with me. I don't know why. I had no encouragement. None of my family were interested. It's just something that's been with me.
But you're not even a trained biologist.
No. I studied engineering initially, and all that time I was watching birds and learning about them. And then I started working for a conservation organisation in the UK, and worked for them for about 13 years, during which time I learnt a lot more.
So you were basically a bird watcher before you started leading birding groups, right?
Yeah, very much so, yeah. Yeah.
Well, professionally speaking.
Yes, yeah.
So you can tell me who these bird watchers are. I mean, this is what I think when I think of bird watchers. They are very old, predominantly male.
Mm-hmm. I'm not agreeing with you, I'm just listening to you.
But then probably most of them are white.
Okay.
Is that...
Well, firstly, the age thing, not true. No, it covers a big spectrum.
You just probed me because you started at a very...
Yeah, but it is a bit of a concern that we're not getting as many young people getting interested in bird watching, and this is a global thing. We need young people getting interested in birding, but now young people have got so many distractions. They've got video games and so much digital stuff. They're not getting into the natural world as much as they used to. So there is a big age spread, but the people who come on tours tend to be, perhaps older, retired to some extent because they've got the time to go on these trips and the income. Predominantly white. To a certain extent, yeah, that is true. Even in the UK, within the ethnic communities, of which we've got many within the UK, you get some people bird watching and taking interest, not just in birds, but the natural world, but nowhere near as many, disproportionately very few compared to why that is. People have discussed at length and have not really come up with an answer.
Certainly older.
Yeah.
Interesting. Then how do you plan any given birding trip?
Oh, well, nowadays it's not that difficult with the internet. You do a lot of research. People come to these countries on their own, travel around on their own, they write reports, the reports get uploaded onto the internet. So it's not really that difficult. With Ethiopia, there are now 2 books specifically about where to watch birds in Ethiopia that give you maps and GPS coordinations and things. So it's a lot easier planning a trip now than it used to be, certainly.
But it's always helpful to have someone who guides you, right?
Well, that's the big thing, really. You try and find somebody local who knows the country and can act as a guide. And Ethiopia's blessed with several very good bird guides. Do
people come only once, or they keep on coming? How does it go once a birdwatcher comes to Ethiopia? Do they keep on repeating the trip?
Within the culture of world bird watchers, generally they only go to a place once and hope to see everything that they can pretty much in that one visit.
But they can. Right.
No, it to some extent it does depend on the place. I mean, if you go to some of the countries in South America, which are very big and very diverse, lots of different habitats, you'll find people going back maybe 2 or 3 times to visit different areas. In Ethiopia, it's possible to come here for 3 weeks and go home having seen 400 to 500 species, including all of the endemics.
In any given trip?
Yeah.
Wow. So bird watchers basically come with a list and they say take off, right?
Yeah.
How does it go? I mean, do they come here to conquer something?
They certainly come, or some people come with a list, not everybody. Some people just like to see different birds. But some people go through the book and they look at the ones that will be new to them. And I suppose it's almost like a kind of hunting thing in a way. You're going out searching for something, and there's a great moment of feeling elated when you actually see that bird that you've been reading about and looking at the photographs.
Is it a mature thing? Is it a mature thing?
No. We get I think a fair mixture of men and women coming on the trips. We often find when we talk to other tour leaders, one thing they often say is that they notice that women have much better eyesight than the men do when they're in the field, when we're out looking for things. Okay.
So once they come, some of them said you come with a list and say, okay, we've said that. I mean, it could also be a frustrating experience. You don't get what you planned.
If you don't see what you wanted to see.
Right.
Oh, yes, yeah. Which puts a lot of pressure on me as the tour leader.
Yeah, that's what I was driving at.
Yeah.
So you're misleading us.
Not necessarily. I think they understand that if we miss maybe 1 or 2 special birds, might be down to circumstances beyond my control. If we missed a lot of them, then they might start to think, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. So there must be some birds who are very difficult to spot, right?
Yes, yeah, there are some just because they're either very scarce, so that there just aren't very many of them.
And they're not static, perhaps?
No,
as you want them to be?
Especially with African birds, which are quite nomadic, at least some are. Or they're birds which just live in very dense, difficult environments, like, thick reed beds or dense scrub or whatever. So
it could be a very frustrating experience as much as it is rewarding.
It can, yeah, exactly. Yes, I think it is rewarding because of the difficulty of seeing some of these birds.
So do people who join in that group of the birding trip in any given season in Ethiopia, do they go home frustrated or elated and satisfied?
Oh no, I think like even if we didn't see all of the endemics on this trip that's coming up, we'll certainly see 95-97%. So I think people will be hopefully anyway happy with what
you come to Ethiopia with these birders, leading them, guiding them every year, right? Mm-hmm. You didn't do that last year because of the problems that we were into, right?
No, we had to cancel.
You had to cancel because of the riots and so on that were going on. This year, you're pretty much sure that it's okay and you can be on the road.
Well, yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back out there.
Where do they come from? From Australia, Europe, North America, and so on, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very strong tradition of bird watching and studying natural history in England, in Great Britain. That's spread into Europe quite a bit now, and also North America and Australia. The tour that I'm about to start leading has got 4 Australians, some Americans, and some British people.
How many of them are there?
12.
12.
Yeah.
That's as big as you can get.
Well, when you're taking a group of people bird watching, you can't have a big group. You not only have I got to find the birds, I've got to make sure that everybody sees them. And if you've got a big group, then that becomes difficult.
How many people in any given car?
We have a mixture of a Toyota coaster bus and 4x4 Land Cruisers, so we spread them out.
When you first came here 24 years ago, I'm sure there were no Ethiopian birders. If we had some, they probably were 1 or 2 or 3, whatever. How many Ethiopian bird guides do we have in?
There are several bird guides now. I think most of the big tour companies will offer bird watching trips, and there are 2 or 3 that have really made a name for themselves and run their own companies that specialise in bird watching tours. One of the guides has co-written a book on where to watch birds here, and the situation I think has improved a lot compared to when I first came here.
A country where you have 800 plus species of birds, only 3 perfect, top class bird guides.
I think
doesn't make sense, does it?
Well,
what is the problem?
I think people have a lot to do with their lives, and it takes. You've got to take care of everything else before you can have the time and the resources to actually start looking at birds. And to become a good bird guide, you've got to know where they are and what they are. You've got to be able to identify them. It takes work, really, and an aptitude. I think all of the guides that are active now started out in just general tourism and just had a natural flair for birds and developed from that, really.
Are you a perpetual learner? I'm sure you are.
Oh, yes, you never know everything. Mm-hmm. Never.
What did you learn when you were here 2 years ago?
That you never know what you're going to find where. That's one of the great things about bird watching in Ethiopia. There's an unpredictable edge to it, which kind of keeps you on your toes, really.
Is that cathartic?
It can be, yes, it can. You can come away. I mean, if you keep going back to the same country year after year after year, you might think it'd be very easy to get bored. But it's not the case in somewhere like Ethiopia. There's always something new just around the corner. It's a very exciting place to go birding, and it's a very exciting place to show people birds, which is a big part of the pleasure of what I do.
So when you're not doing what you're doing now, guiding bird watchers in Ethiopia or in one of the 5 destinations that you like as bird watching is concerned, when you're back home in England, what do you do?
I spend a lot of time running the office, but when I go out birding in Britain on my own, for me it's a form of relaxation, almost a form of meditation in a way, to just go out birding on my own and just getting back to sort of nature, to use a bit of a cliche, really.
Your favorite bird?
Oh, whichever one I happen to be looking at.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah,
So-
it's difficult to say which is my favourite. In Ethiopia, I think it would have to be an endemic that lives alongside the bush crow, the yabelo. It's a white-tailed swallow. And it's a little blue and white bird, and there's something quite magical about the way that bird suddenly appears. You never sort of see it coming from a long way off. It's just suddenly there in front of you, and then it disappears.
Your favorite destination?
Oh, that's difficult.
It could be a specific location.
Ethiopia is definitely one of them. I also enjoy birding in Central Asia, and South Africa is another one of my favourite
A
destinations.
bird that pisses you off, is there any possibility?
Oh, that's difficult. Egyptian geese.
Why?
Because they're all over the UK. They've been introduced into the UK and they are everywhere. And I used to work when I worked for the RSPB managing a nature reserve, these Egyptian geese invaded that reserve and caused a lot of problems. So whenever I hear Egyptian geese calling, it brings back unhappy memories.
Steve, Rooke, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you on my show. I've
you
learned a
very
lot.
much.
Cheers.
Thank you.